In this video, we're going to be talking about our gut microbiome and how this affects and the relationship with our neurochemistry. So first, let's break down the components of this. What is our gut microbiome and what exactly is our neurochemistry? So the microbiome is made up of a vast community of microorganisms, primarily bacteria, viruses, fungi and archaea that are all found lying within the gastrointestinal tract. So the gastrointestinal tract basically encompasses all the organs that food passes through in the human body. So this starts with the mouth, then the pharynx, then the esophagus, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, and then the anus. So basically all the organs that food passes through on the way into the body to the way out of the body. And in the large intestine, which is considered where most of the microbiome is contained, there is estimated to be around 39 trillion bacterial cells. So a rather large number of cells. So the main reason that we have this 39 trillion cells in our microbiota is to help break down and digest the food we consume on an everyday basis and extract what we need from it. So let's zoom out and look at the body as a whole for a minute. We know that the human body it has evolved to be this way. It is ever changing and adapting to suit and deal with the stimulus it is most commonly exposed to. So for example, when you start going to the gym for the first time and you start lifting weights, you are exposing your body to a new stimulus, which is basically lifting heavy things. As a result of being exposed to this stimulus, your body will adapt and change, i.e. put on muscle to basically deal with the new stimulus, which is lifting heavy things, to make it easier for you. So the body is constantly changing and adapting to make what it perceives as daily tasks as easy as possible. The evolutionary reason for this is the more easier we can make day-to-day tasks, the less physical effort the body has to go through to do this, the more resources we have to spend on conquering other domains of competence. So think about it, that is why we have evolved this autonomic part of our nervous system, this system that we don't have to think about, which regulates our heartbeat, body temperature, and so on. If we had to automatically think about these things, then we would never get anything done. But the body makes it easy, it regulates it itself, so we don't have to think about it, meaning we can focus on other things. So our gut microbiome does exactly the same as many other areas of the body does. It changes and adapts to commonly respond to the stimulus it is most exposed to. Okay, so I have this diagram or world-class drawing to help basically refer to what I've just been talking about. So in this drawing, we have the gut microbiome down here. And obviously before anything can even get to the gut microbiome, it has to pass through and be eaten by the mouth, which is this little opening up here. So we've got an example person and an example diet for this diagram. So we've got someone who consumes 4 different foods: food A, food B, food C, and food D. Each food is eaten in equal amounts, so 25% of each. And in the gut microbiome, as I've spoken about before previously, it adjusts and alters to suit the stimulus it is exposed to. So 25% of 4 foods, the gut microbiome is naturally going to adjust and alter so that there's equal amounts of bacteria to break down equal amounts of the food. Obviously, bacteria A breaks down food A, bacteria B breaks down food B, and vice versa. So obviously the gut microbiome and nature of it has altered and adjusted to match the diet, the stimulus. So just like the body will grow muscles to adapt to a new stimulus of lifting heavy things, the gut microbiome will also alter and shift to match the stimulus. So in this case, when there was 25% of each food, there was a corresponding amount of each gut bacteria to break down that food. Say the diet is now changed. Say this person is now eating 50% of food A, and then the rest, the other 50% of the diet is just split between food B, food C, and food D. So 16.6% of each one. Because of this change in diet, a change in stimulus, the gut microbiome, the number of different bacteria will also shift and alter to match this new stimulus. So now you can see we have 50% of the bacteria to break down and digest food A, and then the rest of the bacteria is obviously distributed between food B and food C and food D to digest that. The gut microbiome would then shift and alter again if for some reason they reduced the amount of food A they were eating to 16.6%, and food B, if that went up to 50%, it would reverse, and it would be 50% of the bacteria would be food B, and then A would go down to 16.6% again. So the point I'm trying to make is the gut and the microbiome will always shift and adjust to deal with the stimulus at hand. If you eat more of one food, the bacteria for that food will be multiplied to deal with it. If you eat less of one food, the bacteria to deal with that food will then lower and drop to free up more resources and more freedom for the bacteria to grow to actually deal with the food is being consumed most commonly. So the gut microbiome, like other parts of the body, will always adjust and alter to make the stimulus it is now dealing with as efficient as possible. Therefore, if you eat mostly one type of food, it will skew the ratio of bacteria in your microbiota to favour the food you most commonly consume. This can lead to a damaged gut with no diversity and imbalances, which is called dysbiosis. Now, bearing in mind what we've just been through, let's take another look at a world-class drawing. Okay, so in this, we've got two individuals, the person on the left and the person on the right. They are going to consume two whole healthy foods, the steak and the apple. The H's around the outside are just to represent health, basically, and the potential goodness they have inside of them. Now, individual one's diet has been a wide array of whole, healthy foods. Because of this, he has developed a good, healthy microbiome. He has ate loads of healthy foods, so now he's developed loads of good, healthy bacteria, which will allow him to digest the good, whole, healthy food efficiently. This is represented by his microbiota here. Obviously, he's got mostly blue H's to suggest good, healthy bacteria, and obviously a few red. But the overwhelming majority is good, healthy bacteria, which has obviously been promoted for his good diet so far. Now, individuals 2 diet has been the complete opposite. It's been unhealthy, processed foods. Because of this, he doesn't have a lot of healthy bacteria in his microbiota. The majority of it is made up of bad bacteria. Hence, the majority of it are red H's to suggest bad bacteria. There's a few blue, but the majority is red. Therefore, he's not going to have the ability to extract all the goodness from the healthy foods when he ingests the apple and the steak. To put it bluntly, his microbiota is fucked. Now, this is an important point. Your body's ability to extract and utilize the critical molecules in your food is affected by the nature of your microbiome. In this case, individual 1 might extract 90% of the goodness from the apple and the steak, whereas individual 2 might only extract 40% of the goodness. Obviously, it's important to be eating healthy, whole foods, not processed junk foods. But also another really important point is, even though you might be eating the healthy food, your body's ability to break it down, digest it, and extract all the goodness for it is also very important, and that is heavily dependent on your microbiota. If you build up a good, healthy microbiota, it will be better at extracting all the goodness from the good foods. If you don't have already a healthy microbiota in place, then unfortunately you're not going to be able to extract as much as the goodness as someone who does from exactly the same food if you ingest it at exactly the same time. However, the solution is simple. Make sure you eat whole, healthy foods so your microbiome can replenish the good bacteria it needs in order to properly digest and break down these good foods and extract all the goodness from it. As well as this, you're also going to want to cut out, as much as you're willing to do, processed foods and unhealthy foods. These are going to promote bad bacteria in the gut and cause problems for your microbiome. So reduce processed foods and increase whole, healthy foods. Think of it like this. As the amount of poor quality food decreases, the bacterial resources available to help break down, digest and extract the goodness from high quality food increases. Therefore, as poor quality food decreases, goodness extracted from high quality food increases. There is obviously already a lot of information out there about what are whole, healthy foods and what are bad junk foods and processed foods. However, a little bit later in this video, I will be giving you some ideas of what kind of foods maybe you should be eating. However, for now, this is the best rule I can give you. If it comes from an animal or the ground, it's good. If it comes from a lab, it's shit. Eat single ingredient, whole foods, and you can't really go wrong. Now, when I keep talking about goodness from food, what do I actually mean by that? So the microbiome and diet together synthesize lots of different molecules. The two main ones I'm going to be talking about today are tryptophan and tyrosine. These molecules are crucial in affecting the number, effectiveness and efficiency of many neurotransmitters throughout the whole entire central nervous system, including the brain. The role that neurotransmitters play in our central nervous system is coined neurochemistry. And neurochemistry is crucial in regulating our health, physical and mental. So let's talk about tryptophan first. So tryptophan is a molecule that is in food and can be synthesized by the microbiome, and it can be converted into the neurotransmitter serotonin. We will talk about how tryptophan can be converted into serotonin a little bit later. It might be really interesting to know as well that 90% of our serotonin is actually produced in our gut. I think it's quite common thinking that serotonin is just something that relates to the brain, but no, in fact, actually 90% of our serotonin is produced in our gut. So if you don't know anything about serotonin, serotonin is referred to as the happy hormone. Anyone who has spent a whole day raving in a field will tell you that one. However, serotonin's role in our health is so much more important than just promoting happiness. Serotonin plays a vital role in regulating our mood, emotions, sleep and digestion. As I'm sure you're aware of as well, serotonin plays a crucial role in many common mental health disorders, such as anxiety and depression. Serotonin is also the focus of drug treatments for these mental disorders. So I'm sure you will have heard of SSRIs or selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. These drugs work on the serotonin system, helping regulate serotonin throughout the central nervous system and brain, helping symptoms of common mental health disorders. For me, and I'm sure other people as well, it's interesting to realise that the food we eat actually affects our neurotransmitters, it affects our brain and has a profound impact on our mental health. I think most people presume kind of the brain is responsible for all the fancy chemicals we hear about, and our stomach is kind of just like a separate entity whose only job is to kind of process the sumptuous food we consume whenever our hedonistic desires tell us to. So how does the food we eat and the 39 trillion bacteria knocking about in our bodies influence our brain and our nervous system as a whole? That's what we're going to be talking about next. So the gut-brain axis is basically a bidirectional communication system that intricately links the brain's emotional cognitive centers with the digestive physiological processes. So basically it links your brain and your cognition to digestion and your gut. So I think the best way to think about this gut-brain axis is like a two-way street. So information on one side of the road can go from the brain to the gut, and the other side of the road, information can go from the gut to the brain. One part of this gut-brain axis is the vagus nerve. This is one of the longest nerves in our body and is the most direct link between the gut and the brain. It begins at the brainstem and stretches all the way down to the abdomen, interfering with various organs on the way. The vagus nerve enables rapid exchanges of signals from the brain to the gut and the gut to the brain. So understanding that the gut and the brain are connected is crucial in understanding that imbalances in the microbiome, known as dysbiosis, which I mentioned earlier, is a factor in the progression of many mental disorders such as schizophrenia, depression, and many other psychiatric conditions. While some neurotransmitters and chemicals produced in the gut do directly into the brain, not all can, because some can't cross something called the blood-brain barrier. However, even those that don't still have significant impact on mood and brain function through stimulating the vagus nerve. So the communication between our microbiome and our nervous system is crucial in understanding how the molecules produced in our gut have an overall effect on our neurochemistry. But for now, let's go back to focusing on tryptophan and good old serotonin, something I'm sure we could all do with a little bit more of. So as previously mentioned, serotonin is synthesized by a molecule called tryptophan. You can find tryptophan in high quality protein sources, such as meat, poultry, fish, eggs, dairy products, and nuts. Upon digestion, tryptophan is released into the small intestine where it can be utilised for several different functions. So tryptophan can be synthesized into serotonin by cells called the enterochromaffin cells. Tryptophan can also be synthesized into serotonin by many other bacterial species living in our microbiome. These are the names of these bacterial species here. I thought I'd rather write them down and say it because I don't really have a clue how to pronounce them. Although the enterochromaffin cells are not actually part of our microbiome, their amount and efficiency are heavily influenced by the health of our microbiome, showing the relationship between the health of the microbiome and serotonin production. Now, this isn't really too important, but just in case you are interested, tryptophan is converted into serotonin across a two-step process. The first step is the enzyme tryptophan hydroxylase converting tryptophan itself into 5-hydroxytryptophan. The second step is the enzyme aromatic amino decarboxylase converting 5-hydroxytryptophan into serotonin. Now, although it is less important to understand how the microbiome does convert tryptophan into serotonin, it is very important and crucial that we are aware it does. As mentioned previously, serotonin is heavily implicated in mental disorders such as anxiety and depression. In 2016, Kelly et al. Published a really interesting study showing how the nature of the gut microbiome plays an important role in the progression of depression through the regulation of serotonin. In this study, there were 34 patients with major depressive disorder and then 33 matched healthy controls. So basically 33 regular people without depression. Not saying that if you have depression you're not regular, but you know what I mean, people without depression. So this is where it gets a little bit disturbing, but fecal samples were taken from the depressed patients and the matched healthy controls. So although a bit disgusting, a fecal sample, basically a sample of your poo, is representative of the microbiome and the nature of the microbiome. So you can kind of get a good idea of someone's microbiome by looking at their poo, basically. So this is where it gets a bit weirder, but these fecal samples were then transplanted into microbiome deficient rats. So basically rats who didn't have a microbiome, the fecal samples were then transplanted into the rats. When this happens, when fecal samples are transplanted into the microbiome of rats, basically because they already don't have a pre-existing microbiome, the nature of that stool sample will trigger the growth of certain bacteria in the rat. So the microbiome that will be grown inside the rat is reflective of the microbiome of the patient whose stools was transplanted to the rat. Interestingly, they found that the rats who received the transplant from the depressed patient showed characteristics and behaviours of depression and anxiety-like behaviours as well. This is interesting because it shows that when the microbiome of the depressed patient is reflected in the rat, it triggers depressed-like behaviours and anxiety-like behaviours, showing the relationship between the microbiome and depression and common mental health disorders. They also found in these rats that received the depressed microbiome, they found that they had issues with tryptophan metabolism, suggesting that because of the poor nature of the microbiome in the depressed patients, the tryptophan couldn't be transformed into serotonin, synthesized into serotonin, and therefore this is what triggered these anxiety and depressed-like behaviours. This shows the relationship between our gut microbiome and our neurochemistry. Depressed patients had a poor microbiome and therefore were less able to convert tryptophan into serotonin. Therefore, when the rats received depressed microbiome and therefore it triggered the growth of their own disadvantaged microbiome, they showed more anxious and depressed-like behaviours rather than the rats who received a healthy microbiome from the healthy control group. This is a really important and I think interesting finding, and just shows that we can actually help our mental health simply by changing what we put in our mouths. I think this is obviously a very important point because nowadays people are looking at kind of abstract ways of helping mental health, like going to therapy and stuff like that. And I'm not saying those things aren't important and I'm not saying those things aren't good, but we overlook like the basic steps that you could do right now, such as deciding to have a healthy dinner over an unhealthy dinner. Also, I think it's important to note here as well, but I'm sure there'll be a few of you kind of sitting there thinking, well, it doesn't really apply to me because I'm a human, not a rat. But basically, it does still very much relate to you. There is a reason why these studies are so applicable to humans as well. We may not like to think it, but rats share many genetic and physiological similarities to humans. And although we may have evolved many abilities rats have not, the digestive and serotonin system are ancient evolutionary processes possessed by all mammals. So what is studied and found to be true for one mammal is very much likely going to be applicable to all other mammals, especially when it comes to ancient evolutionary processes such as digestive and serotonin system. So what can we do to improve our microbiome and help our microbiome to produce more serotonin, more of the good stuff? As mentioned before, eating a diet rich in tryptophan is extremely important. So high protein foods, animal-based foods, single ingredient animal-based foods. However, we can produce more of the bacteria in the microbiome that turns tryptophan into serotonin by eating foods called probiotics. A few example foods that are high in probiotics are yogurt, kefir, kombucha, sauerkraut, kimchi, miso, tempeh, and pickles. Or I'm sure you can go online and do your own research about other foods that are high in probiotics. Just a side note, I'm not telling you to eat these foods specifically. Obviously, you need to go and do your own research to find out what foods are best for you. It's really difficult nowadays because obviously a lot of vegetables are good for you on their own as a single ingredient food, but nowadays so many pesticides are being pumped into these vegetables to obviously produce a better crop, which is going to make a company more money. So it's important to kind of weigh it all up, do your own research, find out what risks you're willing to take, and make your own choices for your own body. I'm just giving you a scientific overview of what foods naturally are high in probiotics, and you can make your own choices. So Bistas et al. Ran a double-blind clinical trial to investigate the effect that probiotics can have on depression. So if you're unsure what a double-blind clinical trial is, double-blind basically means that the researcher and the participants themselves are unaware of what participants are going to receive the experimental treatment, so what they're testing, and the set of participants who are going to receive the placebo or standard treatment. So the standard treatment or placebo is basically a baseline to measure how effective the experimental treatment is. So for example, if you're trying to measure how well sunglasses help a driver to drive when the sun is shining bright, you're going to measure this by, say for example, they're doing one lap of the track, you're going to get someone to do, maybe the same person to make it as fair as possible, a lap of the track without sunglasses, measure their time, and then you're going to get the same person to do it with sunglasses and then measure their time. The baseline treatment is without glasses, so you can get a good measurement of how much better the sunglasses make the driver. The study observed 110 patients who were either randomly assigned to the probiotic treatment or placebo treatment, so basically no treatment. All patients had mild to moderate levels of major depression. Something called the Beck's inventory score was taken before and after administration of the treatment, so either before they received the probiotics or the placebo. The Beck's depression score is basically a 21-item self-questionnaire where there'll be lots of different questions relating to your level of depression, and then you rate the questions on a scoring system, and that gives you an overall number to suggest kind of the level of depression that you're currently dealing with. Of the 110 depressed patients who started the study, only 81 finished it. The results found that with the probiotic group, there was a significant reduction in the Beck's depression inventory score. So before the treatment to after the treatment, there was a significant drop in the score compared to the group of patients who received the placebo, and there was no significant drop in score. This suggests that the probiotic significantly improved symptoms of depression. So why is this? One reason is that the probiotics directly produce more of the bacteria in the microbiome that convert tryptophan into serotonin. So if we can grow more of those bacteria, more tryptophan will be turned into serotonin, and this would obviously help the symptoms of depression. However, there is another way that probiotics can have an effect on depression. When tryptophan is digested, yes, it can be synthesized into serotonin. But tryptophan can also be broken down, degraded by something called the kynurenine pathway. Probiotics have been shown to reduce the number of enzymes that turn tryptophan into kynurenine, basically meaning that there's more tryptophan available to be turned into serotonin. So not only does the probiotics mean that more serotonin can be produced by tryptophan directly, but it also means there's more tryptophan available in the first place to turn into serotonin. Serotonin is essential for your mental health and many other processes. Don't neglect it. Eat a diet rich in tryptophan and boost your serotonin levels even more by eating probiotics, nature's antidepressant. However, serotonin is not the only neurotransmitter implicated through the microbiome, so is dopamine. So what is dopamine? Dopamine plays a crucial role in the brain's reward system, influencing feelings of pleasure, motivation, and satisfaction. Dopamine also impacts movement, memory, attention, learning, and mood. As we talked about earlier, the molecule to produce serotonin is tryptophan. The molecule that we need to produce dopamine is a molecule called tyrosine. Natural food sources which are high in tyrosine are similar to the foods as tryptophan. So we've got animal-based products high in protein, such as meat, poultry, fish, eggs. We also have dairy products and nuts as well. There is a strong relationship between the gut microbiome and dopamine. Some microorganisms in the microbiome have been found to have a neuroprotective effect on dopamine. That basically means it stops the depletion of dopamine. Some microorganisms in the microbiome actually increase dopamine production. When looking at how the gut microbiome affects dopamine, a lot of models focus on Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease, or PD, is a progressive neurological disorder that affects movement. This causes symptoms like tremors, slowness of movement, and rigidity. Parkinson's disease is caused by a lack of dopamine availability. There is interference in synaptic transmission in dopaminergic neurons that leads to motor symptoms. Studies associate changes with the microbiome and dopamine with the progression of Parkinson's disease. Overall, beneficial microbiota seem to be reduced in people with Parkinson's disease, while levels of microbiota that induce pathological processes seem to be elevated. One species in the microbiome that tend to be low in people with Parkinson's disease is bacteroids. One study by Hartstra shows the effects that bacteroids can have on dopamine. For this study, Hartstra again focused on the model of fecal transplants, but this time, instead of transplanting fecal matter into rats, he did it into humans, so the study focuses on humans. He found that administration of bacteroids into humans through fecal transplants increased DAT binding. So I can explain what DAT binding is with this diagram here. So this is what happens when dopamine is basically passed from one neuron to the next. So obviously dopamine has to come from the initial neuron. So this is called the presynaptic neuron. So this neuron sends dopamine down to the end, and then that's transmitted across the gap. The gap that the dopamine crosses is literally called the synaptic gap. So it's in between these two neurons here. And then hopefully the dopamine is accepted and taken by the postsynaptic neuron. So the neuron that the dopamine is passed to when it crosses the synaptic gap. Obviously you can see these little squiggles or balls here are the dopamine molecules themselves. However, when dopamine crosses the synaptic gap, not all of it makes it across. So what DAT binding is when this dopamine crosses the gap and it doesn't make it, DAT binding basically means that it is taken back up by the presynaptic neuron, which means it can be recycled and therefore it can be released again and hopefully be successful this time. So reduced DAT binding basically means there is less dopamine availability, and reduced DAT binding has been linked to Parkinson's disease and depression. Enterococcus is also another bacterial species in the microbiome that has been shown to participate in dopamine production. So researchers transplanted Enterococcus into a mouse model of depression. A mouse model of depression is basically a mouse whose microbiome is representative of a microbiome that links to depression. So it has the right levels of certain bacteria, which represents the depressed microbiome. When they did this and then completed neuroimaging on the rats, they found an increased amount of dopamine in the striatal part of the brain. Enterococcus does this by turning tyrosine into dopamine. Other species in the microbiome also have neuroprotective roles on dopaminergic neurons. One of those is Lactobacillus rhamnosus. This is a probiotic, but when introduced to the gut and microbiome, allows the bacteria to flourish and produce more of it. When researchers administered this probiotic to rats who had a damaged nervous system, it actually rescued dopaminergic loss in the brain. This is because Lactobacillus rhamnosus is a key species in the microbiome that upregulates neurotrophic signals. Neurotrophic signals are basically signals that promote the survival and growth of neurons. Lactobacillus rhamnosus also downregulates enzymes that break down dopamine. To increase levels of Lactobacillus rhamnosus, you want to be eating foods like yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, and kimchi. So throughout this video so far, I have explained how two key neurotransmitters are influenced by the microbiome. However, there are of course many other neurotransmitters influenced by our gut and microbiome. GABA is another neurotransmitter affected by the microbiome. GABA basically works by slowing the nervous system down and reducing brain activity. GABA has a relaxing effect, and GABA is basically increased when we drink alcohol. So we know alcohol gives us this relaxing effect. It's because when we drink alcohol, GABA levels rise. GABA can often be used as a supplement to help many conditions such as stress, anxiety, and sleep problems. Key species in the microbiome that actually promote GABA are Bifidobacterium, Lactobacillus, and bacteroids. Foods that increase the bacterial species in the microbiome that assist in producing more GABA are fermented foods like sauerkraut, kefir, and yogurt. Also whole grains and foods rich in glutamic acid. Glutamate is another neurotransmitter which is heavily influenced by the microbiome. Glutamate is the primary excitatory neurotransmitter in the central nervous system. This means it excites or stimulates nerve cells to send messages. It is the most abundant neurotransmitter in the brain and plays a role in several important processes, such as memory, learning, and mood regulation. Key species in the microbiome that increase glutamate are Lactobacillus plantarum, Lactococcus lactis, and Lactobacillus paracelse. Foods that increase the key species in the microbiome that increase glutamate are foods high in protein and fermented foods and naturally aged foods. So understanding how the gut microbiome and the nature of the gut microbiome is crucial in understanding how it can be associated and linked to many mental health disorders. This is really interesting because often when we think of mental disorders and what causes it, we hear a lot about genetics, drug use, trauma, but we very rarely hear about our food, diet, and the nature of our gut microbiome. So it's really key in understanding how our microbiome affects our mental health. One mental disorder that the nature of the gut microbiome has been heavily linked to is schizophrenia. Research at the moment is currently being conducted into looking at how we can change the nature of the gut microbiome with psychobiotics instead and use as an alternative to pharmaceutical treatments for schizophrenia. So psychobiotics, we talked about them a little bit, or we've mentioned a few in this video, are basically bacteria strains that can be put into the microbiome, and then as a result of this, that bacteria that they're trying to encourage grows and flourishes in the microbiome, and then can have positive effects, in this case, in treating schizophrenia. So I think that's kind of crazy that schizophrenia is a mental health condition where it's been shown that the pharmaceutical treatments we have work pretty well. So now, just through changing the nature of the gut microbiome, that is potentially going to have really good benefits and really going to be able to treat it well, I think is crazy. It just shows how important looking after our gut microbiome is, and how we can support our microbiome through what we eat as well. Obviously, the microbiome and the nature of the microbiome has an impact on anxiety and depression as well. This is something obviously I've touched quite a bit on in this video. Interestingly as well, the nature of the microbiome has also shown to be implicated in ASD, autism spectrum disorder. Children with autism actually have many gastrointestinal problems, such as gut dysfunction, constipation, diarrhea, and recurrent abdominal pain. And it's actually been found that the gastrointestinal problems they have are closely related to the severity of autism they have. Research has also found as well that when we look at a child without autism and a child with autism, there is alterations in their gut microbiome. The ketogenic diet has actually been shown to improve symptoms of autism. So if you're not sure what the ketogenic diet is, it's basically a diet removing sugar and carbohydrates. So you're running on high protein, high fat diet. This will make the good changes to the gut microbiome and actually improve the symptoms of autism. So again, I just want to stress, even if you're not someone who has been diagnosed with a mental health disorder, not that you have to struggle with your mental health at all, but it's really important that you look at your gut microbiome, start thinking about it, understand what you're putting into your body, what it's giving to your body, the effects it's going to have on your body. I think it's so easy to overlook these things, and I think we're always looking at kind of the nuanced ways of improving our health, our mental health, instead of looking at the basics. Food is such a basic thing, but it can have such a vast impact. So if you're not already thinking about the food you're eating and your gut microbiome, then do, especially if you want to feel better and be a healthier person. So one obvious obstacle in the modern world we live in as to keeping a healthy gut microbiome is that a lot of the food in our environment is all ultra processed. If you go into the standard supermarket, most of it is processed food. It's not single whole food. Because of this, unfortunately, a lot of our diets are taken up by processed foods. And this does make it very hard to build a really good, healthy gut microbiome. You kind of nowadays have to go out of your way to buy single ingredient whole foods. They're always chucking stuff into our foods quite secretively and cleverly. Like if you go and buy a pack of pure minced beef, it will just be minced beef. But then if you go and buy beef which is, minced beef compressed into the shape of burgers, they've added sugar to it. But you might not necessarily know that because they have so many different names for sugar. So it might not say sugar, but it'll have a different name for sugar, and people don't know it's sugar. So do your research, read the labels of food, have a look what you're putting in your body. A lot of it is ultra processed. And if you want to build a good, healthy gut microbiome, you need to eat single ingredient whole foods. So as much as you're willing to do, cut out processed foods and eat single ingredient whole foods. Sorry, another really sneaky thing that companies love to do as well is you'll go into, say you're going into Tesco, if you're British, you'll know what Tesco is, and you will pick up a sandwich that might look healthy. A lot of people judge what is healthy based on, there's labels where it's like sugars, fats, and it's either green for healthy, yellow for okay, and red for really unhealthy. All the labels will be green, so people will assume that this is a healthy food. But then when you look on the back, if you turn the package over, you'll see like a paragraph of list of ingredients. Half of the words you can't even pronounce. What are they? It's processed foods. It won't go off for a while. It's not healthy whole ingredient food. So watch out for the marketing strategies that these companies do, because they want you to believe these foods are healthy. They want you to eat them. They're trying to appeal to the market of people who want to eat healthy foods, but you've got to be careful because these foods aren't healthy. They might sound healthy. They might be preached to you that they are healthy, but are they really? Do you know what those ingredients do? If not, maybe research it a bit. I also think as well, it's really hard in the modern world to actually realize that our diet and our mental health are connected. More than ever, we are having such a push at the moment around improving everyone's mental health and looking after and being kind to each other. But the reality is we're being advertised and marketed by huge corporations, so many foods that are basically hijacking our desires. And everyone's tempted to eat them and everyone's addicted to them. And these are just common. This is all around us, especially with the rise of social media and technology. We're constantly being bombarded by advertisements of food which are shit for us, which are shit for our microbiome, and therefore contribute to shit health. And these are being advertised to us all the time. So on one hand, we've got, let's improve our mental health, let's look after each other. But on the other side, there's huge corporations making billions of pounds off selling us food which is shit for us and shit for our mental health. It's also strange as well because it depends what culture you're in, obviously, but especially in, Western cultures, Christian tradition, stuff like Christmas and Easter is basically a time where you can get away with putting shit into your body, eating an obscene amount of sugar and crap food and fucking up your microbiome, fucking up your mental health. And that's considered fine and that's considered normal. So on the one side, we have, improved mental health, be kind to one another, but then, take part in all these traditions and scoff your face, and that's fine, even though, down the line, it might fuck up your mental health because you shouldn't be consuming that amount of shit. That's fine. I also think as well, it's strange how, nowadays people have this message of if you're struggling with your mental health, be kind to yourself, enjoy yourself, allow yourself to have a biscuit, allow yourself to eat some shit food. Well, the reality is if you have poor mental health, the chances are it's only going to get worse by being kind to yourself and eating that biscuit. If you want to be kind to one another, be like, well, be a bit harder on yourself. Discipline your diet a bit, eat some good food, because it's actually going to improve your mental health. So I feel like the message is just a bit off. It's just a bit off. So yeah, the modern world brings a lot of problems and a lot of obstacles into how we can achieve this healthy gut microbiome. But it is possible. You have to be disciplined and you have to work hard on it, but by choosing the right things and maybe straying away from what everyone else does a little bit, you can do it. And at the end of the day, it's an important thing to do. If you want to improve your mental health, if you literally want to enjoy your life more, then, it's an easy choice. It just takes a bit of discipline. It's also really interesting that a poor gut microbiome can actually be passed down to future offspring through epigenetics. So epigenetics is basically where environmental factors alter the expression of your genes. So for example, if you eat a really, really bad diet and mess up your microbiome, this is going to change the expression of your genes. Therefore, through epigenetics, this can be therefore passed on to your offspring, and this can lead to them having a damaged microbiome. I know obviously throughout this video, I've just been heavily talking about diet and the nature that can have on our microbiome. However, there are many other factors which impact the nature of our gut microbiome, such as sleep, stress, how we are fed as a baby, and even, interestingly enough as well, romantic couples who had a relatively high kissing frequency, so basically couples that kissed a lot, showed alterations in the salivary microbiota. So the microbiome and the bacterial species in their mouth, saliva, they actually showed alterations in their salivary microbiome because they kissed a lot, basically. So there are so many factors which impact our gut microbiome. Obviously, you can do more research into that yourself. There are tons of factors, and there are lots of things that are kind of implicated with the nature of the gut microbiome. But diet is something obviously I've heavily focused on today because it's quite easy to control. In fact, it's really easy to control. Obviously, there's a lot of discipline involved in diet, but there's not a lot of necessarily factors that you need to keep your eye on other than what you're actually just putting in your mouth. So it's something that is quite simple in terms of how it can help your microbiome. So I know I've heavily focused on diet today because it is such an important factor in our microbiome, but I just want to note as well, there are many other things that you can focus on if you want to really go further and improve your gut microbiome. Because at the end of the day, it's crucial that you do so. So our gut microbiome, incredibly important in improving our health and just having a more overall positive life experience. So please check out the description if you want links to some of the studies I've used in this video and you want to go and explore them a little bit more deeply. But I hope this video has been useful. I hope you've learned something, and thank you for watching.